What's happening, roadies? Welcome to episode number 70. I'm your host, Larry Milburn, and no, we are not coming from a barn in Northwest Connecticut. We are coming from Telefunken Elektroakustik here in South Windsor, Connecticut. Like I said, this is episode number 70. I can't believe that we got this far. Today's guest is Mr. Toni Fishman, the new face behind the new version of Telefunken, I guess you could say, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank everybody here at Telefunken and you, Toni, for hosting us. Alan Venitosh, Patrick McManaman behind the camera, my very own Paloma Criollo behind the other cameras. Thank you guys for everything. I want to thank all of our previous guests in these last 70 episodes and all of you out there for listening and keeping the show going. It's much appreciated. Happy Halloween, if I haven't said that already. And what else do I have for you? I want to tell you about the fact that I'm leaving. As you know, I've been talking about it. I'm heading down to Mississippi in a couple of days, and I'll be there for 30 days all through Thanksgiving. And so I'm going to go on kind of a bit of a blues thing. And while I'm down there for the next 30 days, we are offering all of our T-shirts at 15% off if you go to the store and you use the code Delta Blues. That's Delta Blues, gets you 15% off all of our T-shirts, so check it out. But without further ado, let's jump into this episode. Toni Fishman, again, thank you for having us today. You have led quite a journey into resurrecting this brand from being a taper and going to shows and living and dying by live sound and the microphone.
Yeah, it's been a pursuit of what sounds good, you know.
Yeah.
Traveling, seeing bands, experimenting different microphones and different technique, and kind of eventually finding a niche within a niche.
Yeah.
For many years, I concentrated on selling everyone else's microphones and operating a home studio, which at a certain point when sort of the internet took off with things like eBay, it became pretty hard to be competitive.
Right.
At that point, I started kind of with a friend in the studio talking about, you know, the certain Achilles heels of different microphones. And a dear friend of mine in California, a broker, a gear broker, who I've worked with and who's been a mentor of mine for many, many years, Dan Alexander, helped me acquire a large microphone collection from Warner Brothers in Nashville.
Oh, cool.
And in that collection, there happened to be 4 original 251s. And when we got them here, amongst many other microphones, we found that the 251 sort of had a problem in that the plastics they were made out of, the internal plastics, would dry out, vulcanize with age, and the pattern switch would fail.
Okay.
So the way this really got going is because of something as simple as a little plastic switch like this failing.
Right.
And I was always really visual, hands-on kind of person, and I like copying things and trying to make my own version of them. And,
yeah.
And it became really kind of clear with the pattern switch that we had an opportunity to make much more than just the switch. You know, because this sits in the microphone like so, and the capsule is up here, right, and the tube is here, and or the body tube is here, the vacuum tube sits here, so the heat rises into the switch all the time. And this would dry out, and what would happen is either the tip of the switch would break off, or it would crack sort of right where these two pieces come together. So they were all failing, and the microphones were worth $15,000 a piece. So, you know, is someone going to buy a $500 plastic? Yes.
Right.
So we went and, you know, this meeting, Alan Sides of Ocean Way, he had a microphone that had been owned by, was his microphone, excuse me, that Joni Mitchell requested to use at her home studio. And they worked out whatever arrangement to let her borrow the microphone, and the microphone was like his best 251. And she had it there for quite a while. I was working on a record, and I guess there were some candles or a gobo with some tapestries around it, and something happened. A candle fell over, and it caught fire, and there was a small fire in the vocal booth, and the microphone got burned.
Holy shit,
So
man.
that's really how this all started, was that I finally found somebody who said, I have the best sounding 251 on earth, and it just got burnt. Can you help me fix it?
Wow.
And I was like, okay, now I have somebody, because with the capsule parts, there were like a few different versions of the capsule.
Right.
I think we took apart like a dozen different kinds of CK12 that had slightly different holes or venting or tolerances.
Yep.
It was sort of a work in progress for them, in that they didn't really know what was going to sound best either. So they were made to one spec in the beginning, and then they changed the spec. And be Rev 2, and then Rev 3, and then Rev 4, and then Rev,
Yeah.
So over a course of time, the capsules changed. But Alan said, of all the 251s I own, and he was the only guy at that point in time that had like 20 of them, that this one, he said, sounded best. So when I found out that it had been burned, I said, well, since it's broken, can I dissect it? As long as I promise to give you back a repaired microphone. He was like, have at it. I can't, it's worth nothing to me right now. So it was literally from breaking that burnt microphone apart and extracting the back plate and the resonator plate and getting specs off that, and then beginning to make capsules to that spec that we finally got what we thought was the best sounding version of a 251. And I was able to re-extrude the plastic on the back plates and relap them, and I actually rebuilt that microphone with new plastics. All the original bits of metal in that microphone are back on it, and he has it. It's a working microphone now.
And what did he think of the sound coming out of it?
He was like, it's on par with an original, and that was when we were like, okay, that's what led up to the Tech Award.
Right.
Because
Damn.
that story, Alan Side saying, well, they did it. Not only were they able to rebuild with unobtainable parts my microphone, but it sounds the way it should. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was sort of what I think what did it. That
Right. That sort of stamp.
They talk about like collector cars, and a collector car can be just a car that happens to be preservation class car that's kept in really good condition, or it belonged to somebody special. Right. It was Carl Sagan's car, or whoever,
Sure.
belonged to somebody, special, or could afford a nicer car at this point in time. Right?
Yeah.
So there's always a backstory with things,
Yeah.
and sort of finding that 251 that had been burnt, because I had knocked on a lot of doors before that time saying, is there a chance you'd let me take your best microphone apart?
Yeah, no.
No one's going to do that. I had 4 of them, and I didn't want to take mine apart.
Wow.
Because I was afraid I'll never get it back together again.
Right. Right.
But it was finding that one fire damaged microphone that like literally opened the door, and that's the beginning of making the plastics and figuring out how to rehab that microphone, and then if we can rehab that microphone, then we can make more.
Have you seen Joni? Have you ever given Joni a hug?
I bumped into her once at Alan's studio, and she was kind of walking through the studio carrying her little puppy Benji kind of dog, and wearing this big hat, and she's just humming or something down the hall, and I'm like, wow, what a story. Like, if she hadn't have had candles and that vibe in the studio, and that microphone hadn't gone poof and a little bit of flame hit it, right, we'd all not really know if we could have gotten here.
We'd be sitting here right now. That is crazy, man. How did it look when you got it? Was it just like
it literally was
scorched
it was in a shoebox, and I have a picture of it somewhere. It's just like the metal has black soot all over it, and the plastics on the inside are
oozing out,
just completely just melted. The whole thing was melted.
Wow.
It was enough heat to melt everything to the point where there's no way it could be used again. The only thing that was able to be salvaged were the metal bits. So the standoffs from the circuit board,
Right.
the plug at the end, the connector.
Yeah.
What we didn't have, we remade.
Wow.
It was the
crazy.
plastic is really what started it,
Sure.
you know. But yeah,
That's
that's
wild, man.
sort of the then there've been other microphones that, you know, Jake was saying there's some microphones that we sold and that were in a basement of some studio somewhere and got flooded.
Right.
You know, so every once in a while we see like some really amazingly damaged microphones that we're able to kind of fix or repair or bring back or revive. Or
And up until 2000, there was nobody else. Like, if you had taken your microphone apart, there was no one else out there.
you would have to literally, if you wanted to fix one of these, you'd have to literally glue it together or redesign, you know, come up with a placebo for the switch housing, or you'd have to rob Peter to pay Paul. You'd have to go to another, you'd have to buy another microphone
Right.
to get what you needed.
Sure.
And then you'd have, you know, one that was a good one and one that was a not so good one, and you'd sell the not so good one to have the good one, right? So you'd have to, you know, kind of like,
Yeah.
well, there was a lot of that going on for a long time. People
Right.
buying them because they wanted to have a 251, and then they got the 251 and they realized that it's not in such good shape, so that they sell it again or whatever, until we sort of came on the scene. And then all those broken microphones sort of come out of the closet and need service, and, well,
Now you got a business. Right.
Yeah.
Sick, man. I want to get to your personal history
Sure.
and where you're from and
Yeah.
your family's from. And
I grew up.
Are you from here in
Grew up in
Windsor?
in the Hartford area. I grew up in West Hartford.
Yep.
I lived in Simsbury for a little bit, and now in Farmington, Connecticut.
Were you a player as well? Guitar player? Good
Yeah, I
drums, anything?
started playing guitar around 8 years old or so, and I've stuck with it. But I'm always thought of myself as better with the gear than really on the front end with a guitar.
Yeah.
I appreciate tone. I love playing in it, you know, guitar and what sounds and effects it can come up with is really a big you know, it's a little too subjective. There's too much out there.
Yeah.
I like staying a little more focused with, you know, how do we record those tones and those sounds just right.
Sure. What kind of stuff were you listening to as a kid? What was in the house?
Oh man, it started off with things like Harry Chapin and James Taylor and Jim Croce and stuff really my father would play.
Yeah.
Really, you know, driving in the car on trips. We'd spend a lot of time up in Vermont. I was just up there for the leaves this past weekend.
It's gorgeous
and,
up there right now, huh?
Yeah, it was really, really beautiful to get out there and sort of take a minute to think about how far we've come. you
Yeah.
know.
Do you do that a lot? Do you try to get away and sort of see the forest with the trees?
Over the last 16 or 17 years of doing Telefunken, there have been times where I've taken kind of little extended absence and needed to kind of get back to things like my family and working on myself, really.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's definitely important to do that. I think for someone like you, you're leading a team. This is a big growth period for you for the company.
Yep.
Sort of recharge and see ahead is got to be important.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility. You know, from in the beginning, the reverse engineering of classic microphones to trying to be innovative and find a way to offer those sounds to people in more affordable packages. And, you know, the brand is just so well received. My team has done such a good job at holding their end down that really the focus of the last year and a half or so has been an expansion here in South Windsor, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Where for the last 15 years we were kind of multitasking in 10,000 square feet.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, studio, manufacturing, the R&D, the warehousing, everything happened here. And through a lot of work with my family, we were able to get more space in the building. And we're expanding. We got another 17,500 square feet of space. We expanded the warehouse and now have moved all the warehousing over and the R&D center. The R&D center is really starting to take off. And the next phase will be moving sort of the manufacturing over to its unique footprint, which we've been working on getting that all laid out.
It's really happening behind us.
Yeah, it's happening now behind us.
A bunch of dudes and dudettes back there working away.
It's really a miracle. I mean, you know, this just took an incredible amount of dedication and focus to pull it all together. From recreating something as simple as a microphone badge to a pattern switch to figuring out how transformers or microphone capsules are made.
When you're out in Stowe, Vermont on your own and you're reflecting on all this stuff and you think about the last 17 years and where things have come from and what you've been able to accomplish and where it's going, how do you feel?
Well, there was, you know, it's a difficult world in that people are really now wanting that instant gratification of clicking on something or seeing something or being able to get it now. I'd like to think that the Telefunken microphones are kind of made by hand and, you know, with the utmost care and tested, you know, and retested. And this is kind of, you know, something that, you know, it started really, I got to back up a little bit and say that, you know, growing up as a kid, you asked me what kind of music I listened to. Just out of high school, I listened to a lot of things like, you know, Grateful Dead. Max Creek was a band from Connecticut that I loved to death.
The Creek a couple times.
And saw them many, many times.
Yeah.
And through that kind of taping and all of that, it really opened a lot of doors for me. And that my uncle at one point, one of the first things I ever got was the Sony Walkman, you know, the cassette player.
Sure.
You know, and that connected it to me. So, like, whether I'm mountain biking or skiing or something like that, I'm usually always taking music with me, right? You know, so's the rest of the world, right? I really think Telefunken could be a great brand and do other things other than just microphones. But we've had to kind of keep blinders on. Headphones is something we really need to take a good look at. And there are other things, you know, from being a guitar player, vacuum tubes and guitar amps, the way those things are put together. They're tough markets to get into, but
I was going to say, you're not talking about areas that are
too dissimilar from building power supplies or tube microphones.
Right.
You know, it's just some of it's a little bit bigger, or you need a cabinet shop, or you know.
Yeah. But also things like, you know, the headphone market, for example, is totally saturated. It's like, how do you stand out? Which was going to be one of my questions for you, you know, in terms of Telefunken. How do you try to stand out?
It's really about finding people, talent, and friendships, and working with them to see what kind of fruit can grow from the vine, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of great ideas, you know, that were either impossible to realize. You know, our track record though is that we've been pretty good at focusing with the microphones, and we have some pretty significant victories, you know, under our belt. Bringing back the 251, being able to make CK12 capsules, U47. These projects were, you know, really meaningful to a lot of people and to a lot of music out there that's being recorded. I'm not sure how many of each of those microphones we've made now, but there are literally hundreds and hundreds of them out there.
Yeah.
You know, I like to think that, you know, each of these customers are people who believe in my team, you know, in a vision of quality and in the way things sound, and hopefully it translates, you know.
Let's talk about the taping world a bit. Tell me how you got into that and how long you were in that world, and who are some of the people that you met along the way?
From about the time I was 15 or 16 years old, I started buying taping equipment, whether it was a Sony D5 recorder, and then a Sony D7, and then a Sony D10. Eventually, it somewhere in the middle there turned to digital tape.
Yeah.
But I was still taping, and then the disc happened.
And
right?
what were you doing? You were trading these?
Well, yeah, I would.
Or was it more about the archival?
It was more about me going and recording and making a reference. I always felt great driving home from a show and being able to listen to that show again. I felt like privileged to be able to hear the show I was just at, and it really helped. My appreciation for that music.
Yeah.
Being able to throw on a copy of a show I was at, one of the first concerts I went to.
Yeah.
So for a long time it was the archival, but I think I wanted to push it a little bit more than the average taper, and I got nicknamed for a little while on the West Coast. They called me the Armada, and they didn't really like seeing me coming because I was a little bit, I got the award for the most youthfully exuberant taper, right? In that I would piss most bands off because I would bring like just outrageous gear.
Uh-huh.
Very valuable microphones, really, really nice stuff. And I would
Yeah.
record, and I'd always be happy to give them a copy of my recording. And, a lot of those recordings got to the band, and then they, for whatever reasons, didn't get out.
Right.
So I'm
And were you trying to make buddy with the front of house person to
Well, yeah, I
get the board copy and all that, or?
Around 1997, I took a job working with Acoustic Junction and a band from Colorado called Leftover Salmon.
Yeah.
And a close friend of mine, Johnny Farr, was their tour manager.
Uh-huh.
And I was archiving those bands traveling around the country.
Right.
And that sort of showed me a lot of what was happening on the live side of the business, stages and the gear that was being used, and beaten to death every
Right.
night.
So you were sort of their in-house person.
Yeah.
But how would that differ from just having their front of house person record off the board?
Well, I would bring microphones, so I would do an audience recording as well as the board, or
Got
I'd do
it.
a matrix.
Sure.
Or I would do multi-track recording. I also, pretty early on, was working, summer 94, 95, I was working in Nantucket for a place called The Muse.
Uh-huh.
And it was before Dave Matthews or Hootie or whatever ever took off. And,
Right.
and those were bands I got to work with in the very beginning.
Yep.
And I think just from being in a couple of those unique spaces where bands were coming through a lot, I got to kind of see a lot of microphones in use.
Yeah.
It wasn't really till later in launching Telefunken that I decided, well, how is this kid from Connecticut, from the country, going to operate in a Manhattan, LA, studio environment? So, going to see more studios and get out to more trade shows. And for 6 months, I was in LA with an apartment. So, the 4 microphones I got through Dan from Warner Brothers were in terrible shape, and they needed switches, but I, at that point, wouldn't dare to take them apart because they were worth like, 15 or 20 grand a piece. And
What were the years on those microphones? You remember?
they were made in 59 or 60 or something like that. They were pretty early. They were probably in 300 or 400 serial number or something.
60s, 70s, 80s.
Well,
Nashville.
yeah, they did a lot of work in Nashville.
Yeah.
They worked there at Warner Reprise Records. Warner was a funny company because, of course, they were built on what they called bunny money. Everything was built on Bugs Bunny.
Right.
So they had kind of unlimited budgets. They had like 4 of every classic microphone you can imagine.
Wow.
So when that collection sort of came into my hands and I started going through it, it begat the creation of things like remaking the molds, the plastics, how to make that 251 again. There's another unique relationship. I had a dear friend in Seattle, Washington, Oliver Arkett, who was a guy who I had befriended and talked to, spent hours talking to on the phone about the history of Telefunken, and he was interested in building V72 mic preamps and helped us in the beginning with some power supplies and transformers. And sort of in the beginning, I was able to figure out that the Telefunken trademark, or the diamond shape in North America, had not been registered. So, this is how we acquired the trademark. Oliver basically registered the trademark and sold me the diamond shape logo. And then I established use and commerce by putting a team together and building microphones and selling them with the name Telefunken on them. Sort of putting the logo and the name back together again, and establishing it in United States. And
just prior to this, what were you thinking about doing? Did you have were you like going to go and be a lawyer, and then you kind of stumbled into some of this stuff? It sounds like you were around the music industry.
Family business was commercial real estate, and the building that we're inside of is one of my family's buildings, which is fortunate for Telefunken that we've had a good deal with my family.
How long have they had this?
We've been in this space. The building is almost 40 years old. We've been here about 16 years.
Okay.
And without getting too off subject, I didn't really enjoy the property management, the plowing of snow and the mowing of lawn and the fixing of light bulbs and whatever else the tenant needed.
Right.
And I was really interested in music. Unfortunately, I didn't get along with my brother too well.
Okay.
So I ended up following my 2 feet, so to speak, and I worked in a stereo shop. Before the stereo shop, I worked in a camera store, and I was really into vintage cameras back when cameras used film, and there were a lot of shutterbugs and a lot of people doing that. And with the microphones, there were only like 4 or 5 guys in the world that people trusted with repairing their microphones. So I saw it as a real niche thing to be able to start offering microphone service and make parts that hadn't been available before.
Wow.
And reverse engineer that stuff. And that sort of what kick-started the business and how it came to be. Through another unfortunate accident. At one point, the studio, I had a studio and a mobile recording truck.
You're a guy who just liked to, go down some fun roads.
I didn't go to college.
Okay.
My family allowed me to spend my college education sort of on gear. And
was that okay for the family, or was it frowned upon? And like, what's our boy Tony doing?
Well, the day I showed up and I bought the Neve console, my mother got a little upset with me.
What was the story behind the Neve? If you're gonna go buy a Neve console,
I had this house in Simsbury, Connecticut, with this nice wraparound deck, and there was a hot tub and a great window, and I was like, wouldn't it be great if there would be a studio here, right?
Sure.
And at first it started in the sunroom, and the studio overflowed out of the sunroom into the living room. It turned out to the point where I couldn't live in the house because it was all studio and rooms to record in. I ended up renting my neighbor's house with an option to buy it. And at one point, it started to kind of take off. There were bands coming through. I hired a studio manager to run that location for me.
Wow.
And we had a unfortunate accident in that during the winter, at one point the furnace shut down, the pipes froze.
Oh.
What took 5 years to build washed away in 5 days. And thank God I had my business set up. I was insured properly, and the transfer of energy allowed to create this space.
Wow.
So at one point, I had to kind of, and that's the way it's been. It's been kind of like a leapfrog game, if you will. I had to get from one lily pad to another along the way, and the complicated footsteps. But if I hadn't been a taper, or had a mobile recording truck, or a home studio, or worked for those bands on the road, really, maybe none of this could have happened. But the transfer of energy and moving forward and keeping things moving forward with a vision to try to have maybe Connecticut's best artist recording studio, soundstage, the best microphones coming out the building, and hopefully in the future to be able to expand and do other product lines. There's enough space here where we could really do everything we needed to do.
Yeah. But with Telefunken in particular, with the brand at that time, what an amazing opportunity to find that it wasn't registered here, that it had this incredible heritage and history and tradition, and you saw this one little thing. One little plastic thing that sort of, pardon the pun, flipped the switch for you and was like,
yeah,
I can jump into this.
Yeah, maybe it's not a maybe. It has to do with my mom being German, and my grandparents, and growing up around them and appreciating things from Europe, mostly in the form of, I was fascinated with Volkswagen for many years, and with motorsports in general. I was probably the first kid on my block to ever put subs in the trunk of their car. I probably blew the back window of my GTI out, a couple of times, experimenting. But it's just something that for me, I like being hands-on. I've always been able to kind of see signal flow, if you will. And have an understanding for what the good gear really is.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to be able to own it and use it and kind of kick the tires, if you will, and see where the rubber hits the road.
Sure. It also sounds like you have a knack for surrounding yourself with good people.
I'd like to think so. I'm not the best people person. I'm always working on that, kind of creating that warmth that you need to kind of I've always been reclusive. I've been a little shy about it, but at the same time there are times where I'm like, yeah, we're doing it,
right.
The wheels are turning and it feels really, really good.
You
can't have these tremendous successes without also having some darkness in your life.
Yeah.
And I've worked really hard to try to get away from that darkness.
So that was going to be a question for you: is how have you worked out of that darkness?
Well, I'd like to think that the microphones serve a very important purpose, and that's collecting good vibrations and making people, when they listen to music, feel really good about it.
Yeah. We talked just before we started rolling about some of the recent events that have taken place, like Las Vegas and whatnot.
And I'll say, earlier this year we went down to the XL Center in Hartford. We took most of all the guys from our staff here to the Tom Petty concert. And I never in a million years imagined that would, really be the last opportunity to see and hear him live.
Yeah.
So, that was a little upsetting, but I also feel like, what's going on in the world is sort of attacking on our freedoms, if you will. And I look at what happened in Vegas. I've got a lot of dear friends in Vegas. I know a lot of musicians, and I have a friend there has a studio facility. And, I know people who were right there who lost people on either sides of them. It's just terrible.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that, I'm a little different than your typical business owner in that I really want to see this company do things differently and kind of get a message of good vibes and peace and have the art and humanity stand through the quality of the products we make and the customers that we can get to.
You mentioned earlier, again, I think before we started rolling, that a lot of that stuff, a lot of that life stuff you learned on the road, taping, from being around bands like the Grateful Dead and being in that scene and Max Creek and whatnot. What are some of those things that you picked up? And were there some key players for you that, that helped guide you I mean, you're a young kid. I know what that scene's like. I was around that scene also. You know, you're those shows are. There's always someone to sort of take you under your wing, right?
Well, yeah. You know, the bands are, you know, families, and through being around those families, there are different lessons learned. Probably the most significant lesson that I learned is to try to really listen and focus on what's happening at a live show.
Mm-hmm.
There's good and bad that, you know, you learn from being around pranksters, right?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I could tell you some things, but
You
you
can
know,
tell us some things.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, like I saw, like, for a while, you know, a bunch of different West Coast artists, you know, wearing these T-shirts that say, what is it? Basically, shut the front.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they want you to be quiet at the show. You
Right.
know, and you know, I like going to shows and I like celebrating, and I think there's a place for doing that out on the lawn. But, you know, when people are paying now $200 or $300 sometimes for a ticket,
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of rough if the guy's either yelling or screaming or barking right next to you, or holding up his cell phone all day long right in your peripheral.
Right.
You know,
Right.
There are things like that to me help, but also take away from the scene.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a new kind of rainbow warrior that's needed out there to kind of to help the scene.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I grew up in West Hartford. You know, Wavy, Gravy is probably one of the West Hartford's, you know, most unusual famous people.
Sure.
And you know, I'd like to think, you know, my father went to Old Hall High, the same high school that he went to, and you know, I spent a little time at the New Hall High. But
Yeah.
I'd like to think that part of what I learned from that is to not take life so seriously,
Mm-hmm.
and to try to stay in the music and stay focused, and to try to carry it forward to help the scene as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It needs some attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
especially after what happened in Vegas.
Yeah.
You know? There need to be more events like, you know, I don't know, when I was growing up, the big one was We Are the World, or, you know, Live Aid, or
Yeah.
Farm Aid, or,
Yeah.
you know, and that's something I would really like to see happen in the future. I don't know if that's a dream I hope I'll be able to realize it one day, you know, and do some kind of Telefunken music festival for peace or whatever, you know. But
yeah.
I'd like to, you know, try to do something like that one day.
It's funny that you talk about having these visions of doing these great things, because when I spoke with Alan here a few episodes back, one of the things he said about you that was so amazing was that you not only have this incredible ability to have a vision for the future and to do these things, but you also have an incredible attention to detail and
Yeah.
focus on sort of the minutia.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
You know,
Are you conscious about it, right? Or is it like,
well,
and
chemically,
can you get lost?
chemically it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, for a few years of my life, I went through a dark period, and I had some problems with my back and back surgery, and you know, I never broke a bone in my body or had any surgery before that point, and I never really took any meds that, you know, grab a hold of you, shake you up and down, and make you hold on for dear life.
Yeah.
You know, I believe that I'm a survivor, and you know, I'm really lucky. I'm really, really lucky. Most people don't come back from it.
Uh-huh.
And
You had an accident, like a car accident? or-
no, I had spinal lipoma. I had
Okay.
a bump on my back that kind of grew and grew and grew, and I should have probably got it dealt with, and I didn't, and then it was too late, and
Wow.
had a pretty evasive surgery on my upper back, and
Uh-huh.
but I'm healed. I'm fine. I
Yeah.
just didn't like what happened to the time leading up in which I needed pain meds and the time after.
Yeah.
Not that this is really appropriate for this interview, but one of the things I like to say to people, and I'm not afraid and I'm not ashamed, is that I am a survivor and that I believe in helping people. And if anybody can get any motivation from what we're doing here with the music, that's really important to me.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome, man.
You know?
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's, you know, you can get carried away in the scene.
Yeah.
And I like to think that my attention and focus is the yin to the yang, if you will, in that I really like not cutting corners and making it the way it should be. And maybe it's not the most profitable way to make it,
Right.
but in the end, it's going to sound just the way it should.
Yeah. Well, and again, before you and I sat down, your in-house audio guy, Jake, and I were talking about some of the quality control and whatnot that goes on, and the testing of each individual mic, which I think you would come to expect in any arena, but I didn't realize that there's a footprint of each mic that's recorded and logged away, so that if that particular mic comes back for an issue, you can reference back to right before it left the facility.
Testing is really important, but above and beyond all the technical, it's really about people. And that's probably the most significant lesson I learned about hanging with all those bands, is that there is always a group of people that make that show go on. And you know, Alan and the team we have here that we put together, they really know how to stay focused on what they're doing.
Yeah. And
I really feel that their hearts are all in it. It's hard to, it makes it all the worthwhile when you see that little picture that comes over, right, the Facebook or whatever, and you're like, oh my God, this guy's using our microphones, and oh my God, and it's just a great feeling to see, the music happening through the product.
Yeah.
People.
Right. Well, I talk about that a lot with the folks when I'm on the road with someone in front of house or whatever, and the gear they use and how advanced it's gotten and automated or whatever it is, and at the end of the day, it still takes a pair of ears, human ears, to hear something and make an adjustment. Eyes and ears, and so I mean, surrounding yourself with great people, and certainly the folks I've met, and Alan, I know Alan came right out of school and started working here, right?
Yeah, the way Alan and I met was kind of coincidental. I had just moved the business from my home studio here. We just kind of got the sign out front, and Alan literally drove by, or was living in the neighborhood and saw the sign, and what's this Vintage Tones Pro Audio, and then Telefunken sort of happened right as he was coming in the door. And he's been here the whole time. I have a lot of employees that have been here 10 years or longer. It's important to not only have the microphones be consistent, but the relationships be consistent too. There are artists that we worked with 15 years ago that we're still working with. That's the goal, really, is to be able to provide service for these microphones, whether they be the Diamond Series mics or someone's got a dynamic with a funky head grill that been a little too much whiskey and a little too much smoke. That we like to think that we're the kind of the guys who are approachable. Oh, can you help us with this or help us with that, and we make it happen. It's not such a big company. The perception is, the brand is far-reaching,
Right.
But we're really just a little company here in Connecticut. Struggling every day.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that struck me when I came up here the first time. And also, sometimes I'll have a piece of gear, something like, like Beach Tech is a company that I use for audio interfaces when I'm filming. And I had a piece that broke on this small little unit, and I called the number, and from their website, they're like, I'm going to get somebody who has no idea, where I am or who I am or whatever, and they're not going to care. Ended up being the owner, and he sent me a brand new unit to use and to try out, and and sometimes if you can break through that little facade, you'll see that it is just a small company that's struggling and trying to make it day to day and grow. And obviously you've done a pretty awesome job at that. For those people watching that can see the folks behind us literally building the microphone, I think it's also pretty cool. And I don't know, you can tell me how much it's going to change with the expansion, but so we're in the sound lab, and where you and I are sitting is where bands and artists come in and set up to play. I think it's just kind of cool that they're being made just 6 feet from us, and yet they get put into use right here.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
Yep. It the studio will always be the heart, if you will, of Telefunken. In that I truly care and want to make sure that we're making the best product we can make, and that that we put it through its paces, every which way we can before it gets out there.
Yeah.
I think, the successes of some of the products we have out there, I think we have something like 5 tech awards now. We've been nominated almost every year for something or other.
Didn't you win an award, a tech award, the first year out because of the Switch?
Yeah, bringing the 251 back was one of them.
I mean, that doesn't hurt a guy when he's starting a company to pick up some accolades like that, right?
The 260 small diaphragm tube microphone was another one. M80, I think. And then there's just a few more, but it's we've learned a lot from making those products.
Sure.
And that is something that I hope we get the chance to do a lot more of, making other good microphones and hopefully headphones and doing some other projects.
So tell me more about the physical space and some of the types of things you want to bring in here, what's going to change.
Well, we're pretty blessed in Connecticut in that there's a lot of aerospace manufacturing, town this way, town that way, right in the area.
Yeah.
In 15 or 20 minutes, we could pretty much get to a lot of the guys that are machining our parts or injection molding our parts, or a lot of those processes for many years I've been dreaming about bringing in-house, which requires spending a lot of money buying the equipment to do so. And more interested right now in focusing on the build-out and the lay of the land in regards to manufacturing space. As cool as the lab is back here, we want to have better standards for cleanliness and organization. So, it's gonna turn into maybe a little bit more of a sterile lab, but this space will always be a music space and will always be testing. Whether the microphones are actually built in this space or not, I don't think is the key.
Right.
The key is that they're tested in this spot, that they're put through the paces in this spot, and that the vibe of having a studio here is something that is connected to each and every piece of gear in the building. Whether that be gear used for R&D and prototyping handle designs, or the next best idea.
Right.
We've come a long way.
Awesome, man. So we just had a pretty good time at AES last week.
Absolutely.
And possibly the last AES, or definitely the last AES,
I
or what?
believe that they're folding AES into NAMM, and that was we've just been through our last stand with AES, if you will.
Yeah.
It's sad because we've been going to AES for a long, long time. I think it was an AES show back in 2000 that I started walking around introducing myself with this little switch. It's kind of sad to see it go, but I think it's a really great idea to fold the two shows together, and to have the the two communities focus together will be really good to see. I hope for stronger shows, more focused, and more people.
Yep. And I know that for this past AES and for where you're at right now, expansion in terms of the space is the focus, not so much new gear.
Well,
right,
we
but
just
you've got a couple things.
Yeah, we about 9 months ago we started with these direct boxes, and we make a single and dual channel, both active and passive, and they are using some really good transformers that were custom made from Carnhill Group. OEP, I think, is the label.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be the first non-microphone product that my guys designed from soup to nuts, front to back, top to bottom.
It's like a tank.
Well built.
I mean, this thing is some serious piece of machinery, man.
It's one of the things that very early on, we have some tricks up our sleeves still. We wanted to do a solid state DI, basically. I would like to do a tube DI at one point. But you have to walk before you can run.
Yeah.
And you need those bread and butter products that hopefully a lot of people will be using. And, we wanted to give something to people who want that sound without, needing a microphone. If you have a keyboard or a active or passive bass, this is a great way to start your signal chain.
Sure. Or acoustic guitar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, man. Yeah, that's a
we've
really
driven
solid.
over them. We've dropped them off of the building. It's pretty much indestructible. It's a aluminum extrusion.
Yeah.
And very well mounted in there.
Yeah.
And the components are nice. They really went above and beyond kicking this idea around. I
Very
like
cool.
the logo on the top.
Yeah.
Something to see.
You can see it. Absolutely. Yeah. You can see that a mile away. It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of, Tony?
I'd say that I get to do something with music every day.
Yeah.
When I get up, I know I'm gonna touch a guitar or a microphone or twist a knob or be able to listen to something or
you still play?
Help make a decision,
right.
on steering the ship.
Yeah. Do you still play at all?
I do.
Yeah.
I keep a guitar in my office and I bother everyone. I'm really a frustrated guitar player in that I haven't played enough with other people to really learn sort of the other half of playing guitar, which is, learning how to support another player or be supported in that relationship with having more than one instrument happening at a time.
Right.
That I'm still green. I need to get out and play out more and do that. I just sort of sit around the house with an acoustic or noodle around and it's not the best thing to do because I have attention deficit disorder, right? And I never can really get through a whole song, right? I'll play a few licks or something and then go for another tune.
Right. But, I just spilled a whole glass of water right here in the studio.
It's not the first time. At least it's not beer.
That's true. It won't smell.
Right.
At least I'm not that guy.
We've had
whiskey.
We've had some catering here for some of the events. We've had some good times in the building.
I bet.
I really think that the space is blessed with the musicians that have come through here. I really believe in something that's connected to the music, a vibe that is really hard to put your finger on and really hard to talk about.
Yep.
But we really are only as good as our customers, feel in their hearts, right, when they have that confidence to get out on stage and do their thing.
Sure.
It's really nice to see when someone's, performing, and it's the right take and the right time and the right gear, and it happens.
When it all lines up,
creating that magic is
sure
is what I'd like to think. Somehow have a hand in that.
Yeah.
You
miss those early taper days at all?
I still tape.
Do you still tape?
I still tape. I every time I do, it's an I.
What's the gear you take out to tape now?
Well, jeez.
Are you still the Armada?
Yeah, at times. It depends what band I'm with. Sometimes now it's less is more.
Uh-huh.
I like our M60s a lot. I like the 260s even more.
Okay.
I really, really like our 270, but those aren't really happening now.
Right.
But one day I'd like to bring that microphone back with a slight redesign, make it a little easier to manufacture. Whether it be the vintage microphones or other companies' microphones, I believe every microphone has a reason to be here and is good for a certain thing. And I'm not gonna cut my nose off to spite my face. I'm always willing to listen to a microphone. Check it out, right?
Right.
You never know.
Yeah, of course.
So they all have a unique fingerprint and in a place.
Yeah.
And I guess the trick is finding what's best in the right place.
Right. So you must have that's not your full collection out there, right?
No, that's just a little bit that's in the cabinet.
So of your collection, for the gear heads out there, what are like your top 3?
Well, okay. A couple things that happened along the way.
If you have no problem answering this question.
Yeah, one day I got a phone call from Dweezil Zappa, and he's like, "Yeah, I wanna like use my dad's microphones, and I need help in the studio because, all the stuff is mixed up. I need someone to come out here, Tony, and go through it all." So, wow.
He had to wrestle you away from the building for that, huh?
That was, sort of, I've always been into Frank Zappa, and of course,
That's here. I saw that the last time.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, Mike.
So something really incredibly overwhelming happened to me with the Zappa family. And Gail and Dweezil's kindness were just unbelievable. I went there with my friend Charlie, who was a friend of mine in L.A., who is a really great tech. We spent a couple days there. We went through everything. We matched all the microphones up, changed tubes, serviced what we could, fixed cables, put all the systems together, and sort of at the end, Dweezil's like, "Well, yeah, I'm going to go get my mom, and we'll just have a talk." And, I was like, "Dweezil, I'm not giving you any kind of invoice for this. This is like, it's an honor to be here." None of it was expensive service. It was, a tube here or adjustment there.
Yeah,
or
a couple days or something.
Yeah, it was like, 2 days or whatever. And Dweezil was like, "Well, we want you to pick a couple of microphones." And I was like, "There's just no way that I'm going to take any equipment out of this room." And we kind of ended up making a deal. So I don't know how it happened. I think the microphones got shipped from there to our facility here, and I didn't really know that they were going to show up sort of after the fact, because I didn't want to take any gear from the studio. I felt bad about that. They wanted to reimburse me some way. So when I got back here, I found one of the C24s that had belonged to Frank Zappa. It was given some parts, a U67 and a power supply that were pretty needed some help.
Yeah.
And a C12A, which I harvested the capsule from, a CK12 capsule, and I built a 251 in kindness as a gesture back I took the capsule out of the C12A that had been given to me, and I built a 251 with it and sent that back to Dweezil as a thank you for sort of, giving me that gear.
Yeah.
So he has a 251. He has one of our 47s out there, plus now a whole bunch of his mics working. Unfortunately, Gail passed since that point, and the house has since been sold to Lady Gaga, another one of our clients.
Wow.
And it just keeps, going.
Yeah. So did the gear stay with the house or went with Dweezil?
I believe the gear went with Dweezil, and I think Dweezil now has another studio that he is setting up or has set up. Yeah, there's some crazy microphones here. There's a pair of ribbons that came from Radio City Music Hall. Just some interesting stuff. I've always... The Telefunken name has begat a lot of interesting equipment. There was a large microphone collection here from Royal Albert Hall. A lot of ribbon microphones from Royal Albert Hall came here. The biggest really collection, though, was the Warner Brothers collection. There was about 300 microphones there.
Oh,
and they are now all with John McBride in Nashville. So they kind of went from Nashville to Connecticut and back to Nashville. So,
wow. But you still own them and they're using them?
No.
Is that how they work?
At one point, we did some business together, John and I helped him put together a lot of the microphones that are down there at Blackbird in Nashville.
Oh, at Blackbird. I didn't know he's a Blackbird guy. Okay.
Yeah, he has probably one of the nicest microphone collections in all of America.
Wow.
I would, short of some other very large studios, he's sort of got an amazing collection.
Wow.
And a lot of microphones that I used to have are down there.
Yeah.
It's one day I wouldn't mind going down and visiting him again.
Seeing your old buddies?
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, listen, Toni, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with me. I know you got to get on to some big things now and keep this expansion going. So thank you for sitting down with me. Thank you again for your hospitality.
Yeah.
And it was great hanging with you at AES. I guess what's now the last AES. And maybe we'll see you in a couple months at NAMM.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes.
Looking forward to it.
Cool, man. All right, well, you folks stay tuned. Next episode 71 is with Aaron Mikulski, guitar tech for the Indigo Girls, Metallica, and many, many others. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And y'all be safe out there.
No roadies, no rock and roll.